everyone. Welcome to another episode of Live Your True Story. This is your host, Mioke, and you are in for a treat today. I was lucky enough to have the honor of interviewing Dr. Paulette Steeves, who, in my opinion, is the most important archaeologist alive. She is completely rewriting human history. That's all. And she's doing it with so much integrity from a story that most people would not be able to imagine would end with having her become so prominent. There's so many lessons just in her life. I think the history books will remember her as an Indigenous archaeologist, of course, but also a truth teller and a visionary whose work transformed how we understand the deep history of the Americas and the role of Indigenous knowledge in shaping that story. She's, I think, going to be remembered as the person who revolutionized how everyone who comes after her thinks of themselves and their origins. On full display is her courage and clarity about what it means to decolonize archaeology. Decolonize is a frequently used word. Many people use it to virtue signal, but she lives it. And because she's a professional, she also articulates it in a way that the academics, the elites, can't really argue with. They can only sink low to tactics that the powerful use when they don't have any actual arguments. She really shows how the search for knowledge is a deeply political act. She says more than once that her role in the pursuit of truth can't be separated from social justice. It's just not possible when you look at everything that's wrong with the world. And decolonizing is probably the deepest way a human being can take spiritual and ancestral responsibility. And she is a beacon of that. She shares with us what it means to be an Indigenous archaeologist and how that's different. And frankly, it's a lot of what we talk about on this Substack. She talks about listening to the land. She's an archaeologist who goes to these ancient sites and knows how to listen to the land with Indigenous sensibilities. So it's really no surprise that she's doing the most groundbreaking work in this field to wake us up from a 500-year dream. She shares about research as ceremony. This book was a ceremony for her. And I was also able to ask her about the invisible hands that guide those who are called to tell the truths that institutions and the West have long buried. She has this amazing concept as well. It's a sort of template of how to walk a path that is so steeped in colonial denial and erasure. She coined this fabulous word called pyroepistemology. And for those of you who are not humanities nerds, epistemology is from the field of philosophy. It comes from the ancient Greek, and it's the branch of philosophy that's about how we know things. And so the way that she talks about knowing is through fire. There's a certain Indigenous practice of fire cleansing that she describes, and God, it's brilliant. And so she's able to bring this wisdom of the elders, but also became an expert in an age that replaces elders with experts. So her voice carries this scholarly precision, but unlike pretty much all the scholars out there, she also carries the force of memory, of spirit, and of prophecy. She really has a vision of how to burn the lies and plant the truth. I came across her because the CBC re-released an interview that they did with her, and man, it hit all the notes. It was touching from her personal biography, and it was also a story of triumph and almost resurrection. And it was fascinating because the thing is that so many academics don't have lives. Like they've just, from the time they were kids, it was just school, school, school. And then they get their PhD, and then they do more school, except they're professors now. And so their whole lives, they have been institutionalized, like prisoners or people in psych wards, right? And there's a real value in people from outside of the academy going into the academy. She had the equivalent of a GED in Canada. She was like the least likely to have the success that she did. But, you know, when you're brilliant, and nothing can really stop that. So her brilliance was recognized when she was in undergrad, and that's also what caught my ear in her interview, because she mentioned the University of Arkansas at Fayetteville, which was 45 minutes away from where I lived in Arkansas. And we were there at the same time. It's like, what? I don't remember a Native woman walking around, but she was asleep probably in Fayetteville when I was going up there in the middle of the night after I snuck out of the house to get high and get snuck into the gay clubs up there when I was someone who was not old enough to do those things. But one of the many, many beautiful spiritual lessons that her story has, similar to Toni Morrison, who didn't publish her first book until she was, I think, 46, is that you don't know what life is going to bring you. And so often people beat themselves up because they're X number of years old and their lives haven't gone through the cookie cutter, factory driven pattern of so many others who have quote unquote success. Her life experience, being out in the world, and then going back to school in her 40s, going back to undergrad in your 40s, has so much value because your brain is formed. You are really appreciating what is available to you. And you have the benefit of knowing who you are. I thought I went back to school when I was old because I didn't follow the track that everybody says you're supposed to take. And so I was in my late 30s when I got my master's in creative writing, but I got so much more out of it than the younger people who didn't know school from not school. She was also able, as an Indigenous person, as a woman, to really see what she calls Western knowledge production for what it is. I mean, when you look through history, there is a template for the historical spin room. It's real. And I mentioned a philosopher named Peter Park, who is a Korean guy, actually, and I interviewed him some time ago, and I'll post his conversation on here. But he did very similar things to what she's doing, but in the field of philosophy. And there's a word for it. It's decolonizing. So she's a powerful reminder of why these institutions only let white men in. There's a reason that access to knowledge and books and education has been so gatekept, and why the bouncers have kept so many more out than they let in. And it's because when people from the outside come into the institutions, they don't always just conform to the institutions. They change the institutions. You don't just add African American studies and find some black person to come and teach the class. That class and that person is going to challenge the identity and the structure and the ways they think they know things. They are a threat. And Paulette is fighting the good fight, and a great reminder that it ain't over. For people who think it's over, it ain't over. I can't tell you how grateful I am that she joined us, that she shared her knowledge, that she lived her life, that she lived her true story and answered the call and didn't tell herself she can't go back to school because she's in her 40s. Like, life presented itself to her as it needed to, and she said yes. And part of the reason that she was able to do that was because she had elders who saw her. And in the same way that we say at plant medicine retreats, don't compare anyone else's experiences, don't compare other people's ceremonies and connection to the plants with your own. So much of healing is letting go of the comparisons, letting go of the expectations, and being in your own integrity and doing whatever weird stuff life is asking of you. So I hope she inspires you as much as she inspires me. This is a conversation about integrity, ceremony, and the return of memory. It's a blueprint for anyone who is struggling to reclaim their truth in a world that wasn't built to hold it, in a world that might even threaten to suppress it. But she is a powerful reminder that the earth is true. The past is not behind us, it's beneath our feet. Thanks so much. And now, without further ado, here is Dr. Paulette Steeves. Thank you so much for coming today.
Oh, thank you for inviting me.
Your book is a treasure, as you are, as your whole story is. I love people like you. And what I mean by that are, you can use the word trailblazer, but really the people who come into institutions and truth tell. When it's so inconvenient to the institution, to yourself, to your, personal livelihood, they can kill your career if they don't like you. Yeah, I just want to start off by saying how much I really honor that personal integrity.
Thank you.
So I wanted to begin by asking you about ceremony, because you're very open and really credit a lot of your book. You mentioned that it was a ceremony of research. And I was wondering if you could speak a little bit about any ritual that guided that process for you and what the book might have taught you about ceremony.
Well, it's this may answer some of your other questions too, but it started in 1988. I was going through divorce, all that yucky stuff, taking my children and leaving, blah blah blah. And I went to visit with a local elder that knew my family well in Lillooet, BC. And he told me that he knew what I was going through was very difficult, but he said that the elders had watched me grow up and talked about me often, which really surprised me. But he said they felt certain I had an important job to do for Indian people. And he said, not just us, he said, Indian people everywhere. And he said, we don't know what it is, but we know it's going to be a lot harder than what you're going through now. And at the time, I'm like, a single parent with 3 kids, a great education, 26 cents in a truck. What could be harder? And what am I going to do? But I never forgot what he said. And when I was getting my PhD, I realized, oh, that's the job you meant. I just have to rewrite the history of the Americas. I got this, no problem. So that in itself was a message. What we're raised in today's society, especially when you've been very colonized and you've not been raised with your community or your elders or your relations, you're taught that if you listen to your intuition, your dreams, your visions, you're crazy, right? So I had to learn. That was the first day of learning to listen. And over the years, I learned to practice that ceremony, to trust that ceremony of listening. And I realize now that's exactly what they were talking about. So, thinking about ceremony, he really began the biggest part of that ceremony of research for me. But I understood the way I was raised, people would think was incredibly difficult, very tough. But I was raised by creator and ancestors to be absolutely 100% independent. I had to always find my own solutions. So I realized, ceremony is a lifelong journey. And for people that have been so colonized, reclaiming those ceremonies, starting with listening, is very important.
And apparently very difficult.
Yes. But if you do it and you trust it and you start to reclaim those cultural practices of listening, of respecting, of trusting, and you have to, it's like you decolonize your mind. So we're raised in a colonial world, a colonial education system, and everybody, no matter what your background, has to realize we all need to decolonize our minds, hearts, and spirits to see the truths that we're supposed to see in this world.
Well, and I loved how you so succinctly put that decolonization is really rehumanizing.
Oh, it's very rehumanizing because the way that colonizers defeated us was to dehumanize us, right? They took away our identities, our languages, our cultures. Like they took away everything and made us pretty much non-human. So when colonizers first came to the Americas, they were allowed to get licenses. They were paid to shoot and kill indigenous people because we weren't a cultural group, we were nature. Just like animals, they could hunt us. So we were so dehumanized. And how do you recover from that? The question people don't ask is, what is the half-life of colonization and trauma? How long does it take to recover, for millions of people to recover after losing their land, their homelands, their history, everything? It takes time, but it takes those people that have been asked to do certain jobs like myself to get them done. And I didn't get to start university until I was in my 40s. I wasn't a typical student. But I realized that creator and ancestors, they know the time that things are right to get done. Specifically for the work that I did, it couldn't have been done in the 60s. It would have been impossible. Now they knew it could get done, so then that's all a part of listening and understanding and trusting that guidance in that ceremony.
Well, being at the place that you're in now with the success that you've had, and I mean, I know you got that huge grant and things have been moving forward in Canada, especially where you are, with the Truth and Reconciliation, and they're not just saying words, they're actually putting dollars behind it. When you look back at those times, do you see sort of an invisible hand that was guiding the process that you couldn't possibly see at the time?
Oh, definitely. Like I went from being I went from being a single parent with a grade A education and a janitor at a university to getting my undergraduate honors fully funded. And then I went from getting my PhD in 2015 to being a full professor with tenure and 1.25 million in grants in 10 years. That's unprecedented. That is so fast. And I feel like I have been running and writing and working as fast as I can because this is the time that Creator and ancestors gave me. I had to keep up. I had to work really hard. And part of that is just trusting, just keeping one foot in front of the other. So I've always faced colonization. I've always faced racism. I've always faced and still face unfair treatment. So part of what I'm also challenged with doing is fighting for social justice for myself and other people of color in academia, which I have spent a lot of the last 2 years doing at the university I teach at. And I spoke with one other faculty of color on this last week who was so frustrated by his treatment, and I don't blame him, that he was wanting to leave, but his wife wouldn't let him. Like he had another position at another university, and his wife said, I'm not moving. So I told him, part of our place here in academia is not just the research and the publishing and the teaching, it's fighting for social justice. And that's what you and I are being asked to do here. And he recognized that. So it's still, we have a lot of successes and we have support coming from different areas. Like I was very surprised. I was very happily surprised when I applied for the Canada Research Chair. It's a huge grant. You take a year to write it, but it's up to 3 scientists or researchers or faculty in a government institution to review your grant and say yes or no. And I'm like, just crossing my fingers because it's never been accepted that these archaeology sites older than are 11 or 12,000 years are legitimate. I'm like, who is going to believe me that I have hundreds of sites documented that I know are legitimate? And I got it. And I'm like, that's great. There are people now in high-ranking people in government institutions that believed me. That's a big change. So I was really pleased with that, and I worked really fast to get my book out. I think a lot of researchers don't get their book out till 5 to 10 years after their grant. I had it out in my third year. Yeah, my third year of my grant, because I had been working on it for a long time, and I had a really supportive publisher. So those are things you can just see when things are working. And I've always had that sense that Creator and ancestors have opened all these doors, and I got to go through them as fast as I can, get everything done and get to the next one. And that's kind of what I'm still doing. And yeah, this week I have to take a break because my shoulders are disagreeing with me.
Yes, we learn to listen to the body as well as we age. You shared that you listened, to stick to that theme of listening, that you listened to the spirits in the ancestral sites and you went on location to many of the places that you speak of. The idea of listening to the land, of listening to the spirits, is so foreign to the colonized mind. Can you talk about the messages or insights that you received from these different ancient places that you've been to?
Yeah, some of it is training that a lot of archaeologists would recognize. So we look at the landforms, and before we go to a site, we'll try to study if there are any records of the ancient paleo environment. Was there a river there 20,000 years ago? Was there a lake there? Was there a glacier there? So part of it is your training as an archaeologist to listen to ancient landforms to tell you where there were possibilities of early humans. Part of it is what people might understand as intuition. So for me, I'm listening at all times for anything that the ancestors, our creator, might tell me. If I go to a site and there's, an eagle or a hawk or a crow and he's jumping around or bouncing around in a certain area, of course I'm going to go look at that area. And, if I see a tiny piece of bone where there's nothing but a bunch of weeds and brambles, I need to go look at that area. So you're listening from many directions. You're listening from your training, you're listening from your intuition, you're listening from your heart and your spirit. So you're being open to hearing anything that's there. So it's not just one thing, it's a lot of things that come together to help inform you about the stories in the land. And I don't call them archaeological sites always. I call them stories that are held in the land. So if our ancestors were here, they may have left us a story in the land to tell us about their time here. And I need to, if that is shown to me in any way, I need to do my best to read and write the story they left for us to share.
I work with indigenous healers in Peru, and they speak with the plants specifically, and also the animals and the stones. But I love how you are um, someone who speaks to the land in such a specific but also a rigorously trained way, like them, but also from yeah, almost like there's an autodidacticism within you to bring in your own viewpoint, but also receive the tools and the trainings from these institutions.
Right. You have to realize, and this was the hardest part of my book to write, was chapter 2. I had to write about the history of bias and racism in American archaeology. And you have to realize, and I spent 5 years working as a field archaeologist full time, 365 days a year pretty much, before I went to grad school. So I got to work with a lot of professional field archaeologists in North America. And what I learned is how they are trained to ignore the stories in the land, right? And they're out there to find and collect often artifacts, not to tell the stories. And it was just really, it was enlightening, but also disgusting to see people disrespecting those stories in the ways that they did. And it's a commercial business. Cultural Resource Management in the United States is a for-profit business. So if they find archaeological sites and they can document them, that's great. If they find any lower than 3 feet, oh no, we don't pay any attention to that because nobody was here. If they find it below what we call glacial till in the north, oh, they just ignore it because nobody was here. So they're already trained to believe that nobody was here before 11 or 12,000 years. So if you find anything deeper, you ignore it. But when I trained with Dr. Steve Holen, he was the time the head curator at the Denver Museum of Nature and Science. We visited and worked on a number of sites in Nebraska and Kansas where they have these big cut banks, they're called, like a big open faced cliff. And at the bottom of the cliff, we would be finding the bones and fossilized remains of camels, horses, mammoths, mastodons, like all these Pleistocene creatures. So if we found any bone that was broken or cut, we knew humans had been there. We listened to what the bones were telling us. We listened when we found those bones either in or at the base of soils we knew, because there's a big history of the age of certain levels of soils. We knew this was what they call a Pleistocene loess. So the bottom, if there was something inside that loess at the bottom, it was likely around 20 to 22,000 years old in that given area. So you learn to listen to those stories. The land holds so many stories, and now we have technologies where we can take soil samples and we can look for what they call biomarkers of humans or mammals. So in Alaska, they found a biomarker for a human dated to 32,000 years in the soil. So we no longer even need bones or artifacts, just dirt where humans have left their biomarkers. So I think scientifically it's getting much better, but mentally for archaeologists, they really need to catch up on decolonizing their minds. And it just seems like it's going to take them a while. And I think there were two really important parts of my work. And one was reclaiming links to homelands in deep time for Indigenous people. And I've heard from many Indigenous people how important that was to them. And the other one, which is harder and will take longer, is decolonizing archaeology and archaeological minds of what they've been trained for 100 years to listen to. But we're getting there.
Well, I'm glad. Yeah, and it's because of people like you that is making the past so loud that it can no longer be ignored.
Thank you. Yes.
What I hear you saying is that almost that another way of saying decolonizing is an incuriosity. And incuriosity is learned because we're all born very curious. That's why you have to childproof your home because kids, what does this taste like? What is that? What is that going to feel like? And it reminds me because really what you're talking about is a new scientific paradigm. And so that reminds me of Thomas Kuhn's The Structure of Scientific Revolutions, where he says something like, that new scientific paradigms appear not from the birth of new ideas, but the death of old scientists, because it is
Yeah.
a power structure and there's so much ego in the academic space. And I was wondering if you could speak to the ideas that need to die in order for this new paradigm to be birthed.
Yeah, well, I'm constantly astounded at how uninformed, well-trained, informed people can be. Like, oh my God. First of all, there's no such thing as a new world. The entire world is old, right? The Western Hemisphere, North and South America, is just as old as the rest of the world. It's called the New World because colonizers named it a younger New World. Okay, we're supposed to base everything on scientific facts. So why do you keep using terminology that is colonial and dehumanizing and not at all a scientific fact? So a lot of scientists, especially archaeologists, are very comfortable with using non-scientific facts to try to support their science. Like, when are you going to, shake off that colonial teaching and start speaking truth? Many times, geneticists and other scientists call Native Americans and First Nations, the indigenous people of the Americas, Asians from Asia. Let me ask you, you're from Asia. Did Asia and an Asian culture exist 20,000 years ago?
No, this was not a thing.
Yeah, right. So, nowhere in the world before the last glacial maximum was there any identified cultural group that we know of. Yet, archaeologists, geneticists, and other scientists continually erase our indigenous identity by calling us Asians from Asia, Solutreans from France. Those places did not exist 20,000 years ago. There were no Europeans 20,000 years ago. You are a scientist. Why are you using biased conjecture to discuss indigenous people? This is important, right? So I'm still trying to get that message across. But this is a part of people decolonizing their own minds. Some people have listened to their intuition. I got an email from a lady who said her father was in his 90s and he was a farmer in Saskatchewan, and he never felt right about the story of people coming from Asia 12,000 years ago across a glacier. He owned a big piece of land and he saw so many signs of what he thought were earlier people, and everyone kept telling him he was crazy. And she told me, she said, when he read your book, he cried and cried and cried because he knew he wasn't crazy. And I'm like, when I found 500 sites that were dating earlier to 12,000 years in just 2 weeks of Google searching, I cried because I knew then that the whole story of people only being here 11 or 12,000 years was conjecture, was false, and the archaeologists knew it was false. Yet they still supported it to dehumanize and make us infantile, make us Asians from Asia and Solutreans and Europeans from Europe, rather than indigenous people who had rights to this land, to the archaeology, to the artifacts, to our identity, to everything, right? We were here for hundreds of thousands of years, and they were terrified to acknowledge that because we might gain rights from it. So it takes a long time when you learn something so profound and you find all the evidence for to make a change to something so profound to realize how it's going to impact future generations. But when you look on a global scale, early humans were in Asia 2 million years ago. So they migrated, they walked from Africa to northern Asia, 14,000 kilometers. So they were very well adapted at adjusting to new climates. They were very intelligent. They held a lot of knowledge of the land. But I can't believe that they got to northern Asia and for 2 million years just sat there without following the animals across a land connection. And we've also learned too, so if there was possibly a land connection from the Eastern Hemisphere, the area we know today as Europe, to the Western Hemisphere, archaeologists are, oh, that's impossible, that's impossible. No. A couple years ago, they radio collared a fox in Norway, an island in northern Norway. So they radio tracked that fox's journey. They didn't expect him to leave Norway. He walked to Ellesmere Island, or she did rather. She walked thousands of kilometers to Ellesmere Island just a few years ago. Do you know that 20,000 years ago, there was way more ice and way more land because of lower water than there is today? If a fox can walk there today, you're going to tell me humans couldn't when there was a lot more land and ice joining places? Like, the evidence that this was always possible is so obvious. So why is it denied? It's denied because of racial bias and because of a history of racial bias in archaeology.
When you were talking about the New World, my first thought was, what powerful rebranding that was back in the day. It's like saying the Roman Empire fell and wasn't rebranded as the Holy Roman Empire. Um, what you're saying is, you know, you mentioned a priori knowledge in your book, the knowledge that comes before experience, and it really comes down to deconstructing the questions that we're asking and critiquing the way that we're asking them, because we might get different answers. I know that you're writing a book on oral history right now, because that's another area in which academia is not listening. It's dismissed at best. And yet, when I read that in your book, I was thinking about what Western history knows and what it's based on. And it's based